Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you the thorough review of the Sony FE 200-600mm F5.6-6.3 G OSS. And so this is a lens that a lot of us were really excited about when it was announced and then released, for the simple reason that the options above 200 millimeters even have been quite limited on Sony. This lens, in fact, now provides the furthest reach natively of any lens in the Sony FE lineup, and thus is incredibly essential. The fact that it also released at a moderate price tag in a relative kind of sense. It comes in at $2,000 US, but of course a lot of lenses that reach to this kind of range cost even more. And so the fact that it was priced within reach of at least some photographers rather than a very elite percentage also made it interesting. As I've spent time with this lens, I realized that really there are very few things that Sony didn't include in this lens. And while it is designated as a G rather than a G Master GM lens, I think that in many ways it has a lot of the characteristics that we've come to appreciate about the GM lenses. And so today we're going to be taking a thorough look at the various aspects of performance, from the build and handling to the autofocus performance to the image quality itself, as well as giving you a final verdict. Now, this is the thorough review for those of you that want all the nitty-gritty, all the details. If you want just a quick overview video, it will be coming out at the end of this week and then will be available after that, and so you can watch for that. We're going to start today, however, by jumping in and taking a look at the build and the handling of this lens. As you can see, it is a substantial lens. It's not a small lens, but what you're getting in this package are some intriguing things that maybe help to offset some of the size and bulk here. Let's jump in, let's take a look. Now, the first thing you'll notice that this is a considerably large lens, and even without the robust lens hood attach, it's still a very long lens, coming in at 12.52, basically 12.5 inches in length, or 318 millimeters. That's actually a fair bit longer than even the Sigma 150-600 Sport, which is 290 millimeters, or about right under 11.5 inches, so almost an inch longer. But the primary difference between this lens and the Tamron/Sigma 150-600 millimeter variants is that this is all internally zooming, and so you have a fixed length. And I find this to really be advantageous. I think of the two approaches, I prefer Sony's for the simple reason that your balance remains the same no matter what focal length you're shooting at. And so it means that if you're getting accustomed to supporting the weight, or however you're supporting the weight, it's going to remain a constant through that. And of course, also you have the advantage of internally zooming lenses tend to be very, very smooth by nature, and it's very, very smooth, smoother than any of the externally zooming lenses that I have reviewed. And so you have a obviously very robust but very nice lens hood that has that rubberized front surface, which is really important on a lens like this, for the simple reason that a lot of times the most natural way to set the camera down is going to be in a position like this, and so the lens hood actually supports the weight of the camera. And so in terms of our features here, we'll kind of start at the front here. You have a 95 millimeter front filter thread. You do have a flooring coating along the front, and that helps to prevent against picking up fingerprints and moisture, and it's part of the weather sealing. Speaking of the weather sealing, as this diagram shows, there are about 15 that I can count seal points throughout the lens, everywhere from around the rings, internal seal points around any of the buttons and or switches, and so a very robust weather sealing, and that terminates at the rear with a gasket here at the lens mount. Now, as is typical with these on any of the Sony FE, the gasket isn't as thick or robust as what you see on DSLRs, and that is because obviously it has to suit the actual mount here, and so that's just the reality of what we're dealing with. So the zoom ring is the furthest out, the focus ring is the closest. This is focus by wire, as all mirrorless lenses, so we have no actual coupling to the lens elements. However, this is a linear focus ring, which Sony employs on some of their nice lenses. That means that you will get a constant focus point. So, I mean, you can actually say if this were my focus point, no matter what speed I was going at, slow or fast, when I got to this point, it would be the same focus distance. I find that to be pretty important, you know, just for general purposes. Looking inside here, there are 11 rounded aperture blades, which gives it a couple of more aperture blades than what some of those competing lenses have, helping you to have a more circular aperture shape with the lens stop down. As you can see, there are 4 different switches here, AF, MF. There is a focus limiter with 3 positions, one being full, the second being 10 meters to 2.4 meters, and then from 10 meters to infinity. So you're going to use this if you're wanting to, you know, focus at a closest distance, you know, under 10 meters. But if you're just focusing outside of that, that will give you extra speed, although the overall focus speed is really fast all the time. The final 2 switches are related to the optical steady shot, on and off for that. And then there are 3 different modes, mode 1 being standard, 2 being for panning, and then 3 being a more dynamic to where, you know, you really only get stabilization when at capture as opposed to stabilization all the time. So less stabilization in the viewfinder, more stabilization of the shot itself. Now, there are the focus hold button here is given to us in 3 different positions, and that of course is so that if you you know, happen to be mounted on a tripod or whatever your position that you're shooting from, you will have access to that focus hold button, which of course can be programmed to a variety of different functions. Now, speaking about the tripod collar, the foot itself is removable. I don't see a way that the actual whole the whole collar is removable because it's at kind of a fixed position here and it has no division. However, what you can do is you can remove the tripod foot, and you can also replace the tripod foot. Unfortunately, this one is not ARCA compatible, and so you can't go right onto a tripod with it, which is a little bit of a liability there. You can also, of course, then rotate this up out of the way. As you can see here, there are strap mounts, and so I've got these anchor points here, and so you can quickly throw a strap. And I found using it, in that fashion, I went out for a hike, a couple of hikes actually already, and I found that carrying the weight wasn't really a big deal under that circumstance. Now, the overall weight of the lens, it's not a light lens. It weighs in at 4.65 pounds or 2,115 grams, so over 2 kilos. And so that's considerably heavier than, say, the 100-400 G Master lens, which comes in at 1,395 grams. It's also a tiny bit heavier than the Tamron 150-600 G2 lens, which is 2,010 grams. So 5 grams difference. You're not going to tell that difference. And it is considerably lighter than the Sigma 150-600 Sport lens, which is 2,860 grams. And speaking of that, when I reviewed the Sport lens, I found it to be a tough lens in some ways to handhold, simply because a lot of the weight was pretty far away from your body. You were hand holding out here to support, and of course by the time you have it zoomed out, you had a lot of weight way out here. This lens right here, particularly, kind of allowing the tripod foot to rest on your hand, and the fact that it zooms really easily, is actually, I find, fairly easy to handhold for a heavy lens. Minimum focus distance here is 7.88 feet or 2.4 meters, and you have a maximum magnification there of 0.20, which is not exceptional, about average for that, but obviously that's not necessarily the strength of this lens. So the optical formula here is 17 elements in 24 groups. That includes 1 aspherical element along with 5 extra ED or extra low dispersion elements to help to achieve good optical performance. Also, it has Sony's proprietary nano coatings on all of the various elements inside, and that helps it to achieve resistance to flare and ghosting and things like that. So overall, we have a nicely made, nice handling lens here. And so as you can see, there are a lot of features that are included here, and the fact that it is internally zooming, to me, kind of shifts the calculus in the favor of this lens as opposed to some others. And as I noted in that segment, I actually find this lens a fairly easy one to balance and to handhold. The actual balance point of the lens itself is good. It's not front heavy. And because you're not having to zoom out, I mean, this is literally This is the zoom action right here. And so to be able to do that zoom action with a thumb and a finger and not have to do a big pump action is a really, really big asset in favor of this lens. And so really my only real critique here is that I wish that this tripod foot was Arca Swiss compatible. As it is, I've had to put a, either you need to replace the foot with an Arca one, or you need to add a quick release plate as I've done here. And I would just, it seems like such a logical, obvious thing to make that Arca, and I'm surprised that they didn't. And so, but a lot of good things obviously on the build front side. Now, I also have a lot of good things to say about the autofocus performance of this lens. This lens utilizes a direct drive supersonic wave AF motor, and so it is a linear type motor, but it has obviously a lot of torque available to it because it really does drive very, very quickly. Now, first of all, before we look at the focus speed and examine some of these sequences, we're going to first just look at the general autofocus accuracy when it comes to IAF and PET IAF and just getting accurate results. Let's take a quick look at this. What we can see here is that IAF has grabbed on nicely at 200 millimeters, and so we've got good detail on the face of my subject here. You can also get a little bit of a sense of on a rather busy background that the bokeh is good, not exceptional. It's not going to deliver the kind of creamy isolation that one of the big primes is going to deliver with a wider maximum aperture, but it still is, it's quite nice here. Here's another portrait type result, just looking at IAF, and so you can see that we've got beautiful, quick, crisp sharpness here, good skin tones, good detail, and here, bokeh is a little bit more flattering just due to probably an easier background to deal with here, but overall a nice result. Though this is too long a focal length overall for using for portraits. The face feature gets a little bit flattened out. Not my favorite focal length, even at 200 millimeters for portrait work. So of course, just looking at PET IAF and looking at action. And so, out of hundreds of photos that I took in the series, this is on the Sony A9. I was just really impressed with this combination. Focus is just fantastic. Really, really great results, even at very high speed action. In this case here, we've got dogs that are just whipping along, chasing each other. And as you can see, focus is nailed like they were standing still, which is really impressive because trust me, they were moving fast. Here's another one here. It looks like a little bear, but of course it is the dog. It's actually a puppy that's running along. And you can see just really, really fantastic detail and focus. And you can see how even by the back paw, that is really, really faded out and the background is kind of, disappearing here. Another result from a, same kind of series. You can see though, autofocus with the A9 just drills it. And of course here's just a beautiful image shot from quite a distance, but of course this long focal length allows you to have a really, really, unique kind of compression of scenes. Now this is actually shot on the A7R Mark III in APS-C mode. And so I found focus a little bit more frustrating on the R3, but what we can see here is that even in a really challenging situation, shooting through a lot of branches and a very, very small bird, autofocus still was able to nail focus in this instance, and so I was happy about that. So obviously a lot of great things there. We've definitely got very good autofocus accuracy when it comes to that. Autofocus actual sound is essentially completely silent. If I put my ear right next to it, I can hear the faintest whirring inside the barrel, but that's only inside of a quiet environment. And in a less quiet environment, you just will never hear it. It also manages to make major focus shifts. And in most lighting conditions, if you're getting into dimmer lighting conditions, obviously this lens doesn't have a very large maximum aperture. And so what you're going to get is some loss of light that's going to slow down focus because the focus system relies on the amount of light reaching the sensor. But in, more moderate light conditions, the light conditions that you're actually most likely to use a lens like this, this lens is going to focus very, very quickly. And so we're going to take a look here at some actual focus scenarios and how it did when doing tracking action. And I'm here with Jennifer from Jengar Goldens, and today we are doing a little bit of testing of the new Sony 200-600mm F5.6-6.3 OSS. We're seeing how it does tracking the action of the dog as they are
us here today. So let's check out how it does.
So on the A9, focus accuracy was almost impeccable over hundreds of shots. And so in the combination I was using, which was the uncompressed RAW plus extra fine JPEG, autofocus speed or frame rate drops to 14 frames per second, which as you can see here is still lots and lots of frames. And so across these, you can see that autofocus is just staying right there with it. And even as the dog starts to get quite close to the camera, tracking continues to hold on, which is very, very rare in my experience. And these dogs, they were moving really fast, either playing, and then we kind of pushed them towards, tracking towards us. And even at very high rates of speed, PET IAF worked very well. I used mode 3 for this, actually high plus for my speed. But as you can see throughout all these sequences, I was just again and again and again, I was blown away. I even had my friend who is completely unfamiliar with any of this shoot and got great results. Now when I switched over to video, I didn't get as good of tracking results. It might have been a little bit better had I changed the sensitivity and moved that up, but under the standard mode, as you can see, it wasn't always tracking.
And so on the A9, I'm really delighted by the focus performance. On the A7R3, it's not as good. You can definitely, this is actually the lens that I highlighted the difference between the two focus systems most dramatically to me. And I could certainly tell a difference in that just focus didn't feel like it was driven as quickly or quite as confidently in some situations. At the same time, you know, it handles quite well on the R3, and you're going to get even better performance on something like an A9 or an A9 Mark II, A7R Mark IV, or even an A7 III. So there's a lot of camera bodies that are going to do a great job in driving this lens. I should also note that it is compatible with autofocus with both Sony's 1.4 times and 2 times teleconverters. And so with the 1.4 times, you'll be able to get up to a maximum reach of 840 millimeters at a maximum aperture of f9. If you throw on the 2 times teleconverter, you're going to be looking more at a maximum reach of 1200 millimeters, but a maximum aperture of around f13. And that's the trade-off for that. Of course, also, if you're shooting it in crop factor APS-C, that zoom range becomes 300 to 900 millimeters equivalent. So, you know, a lot of attractive ways to get a lot of reach out of this. Unfortunately, I don't own either of Sony's teleconverters. I didn't have an opportunity to test the autofocus performance. I suspect with the 1.4 times on the A9, in, you know, reasonable lighting conditions, you would still get very, very fast, very good results. That's been at least the feedback that I have heard from other people. So let's jump in now and let's take a look at the image quality from the lens. We've got a lot of pluses adding up at this point, but let's see how the actual image quality holds up.
All right, we're going to take a look at the image quality here from the 200-600G. Now, due to a blizzard coming through, I didn't have an opportunity to do kind of my standard test, so I set up something a little bit different here for this. So first of all, we're going to look at center sharpness here. And so as you can see here, this is at 200mm f5.6. You can see center sharpness in contrast looks quite beautiful here. Stopping down to f8 shows just a minor variation, just a little bit more contrast, but already we've got fantastic resolution. But you can just see in some of these areas here that our dark areas are a little darker and our bright areas a little bit brighter, so some improved contrast, but already resolution was fantastic. So if we move on to roughly 400 millimeters, it didn't quite line up perfectly. 391 millimeters is what we got. But taking a look at f6.3 compared to f8, we see a kind of similar pattern here in that you can tell that resolution is already really fantastic. But if you look at the bridge of the nose here, you can see that the contrast has improved. Just a little better dark shadow there, a little bit brighter, bright area. And so that's where your main advantage there is when it comes to the overall contrast. So finally, we arrive at 600 millimeters. So the first thing I do want to point out is at 300 millimeters is where maximum aperture becomes f6.3 rather than f5.6. So 200 to 300 millimeters, maximum aperture of f5.6. Starting at about 301 millimeters, we switch to f6.3, which is 1/3 stop less bright than f5.6. It's actually very, very little variable over the focal range. Now at 600 millimeters, we see kind of the exact same pattern. maybe a little less pronounced in terms of the contrast difference. You can see a little bit of a difference here, but we can see even at 600 millimeters that our resolution is held up very well. So this has given a very consistent performance across the focal range. Now in this case, what we're doing is looking at the corner performance starting at 200 millimeters, f5.6 and f8 are being compared here. And so as we can see, even up here in the corner, we can see that there is a little bit less contrast maybe in the corner, but even to right here, resolution is still very good. Looking up in this corner on the f8, it's the same kind of thing, a little bit more contrast, but we can see the detail looks good up in the corner as well. So now if we can compare f6.3 to f8 at near 400 millimeters, what we can see is similar type story, just a little bit of an improvement of contrast, but we can see that we've got resolution right into the corner, no problem there. Finally, we arrive at 600 millimeters, and what we can see is a similar type pattern that we've got usable resolution right into the corner of the frame with a little bit of improved contrast if we stop down 2/3 of a stop. Here's a real world shot at 600 millimeters, wide open f6.3. And so shot from, a pretty fair distance. This is along the side of a bridge, but you can see that we've got, really quite delightful resolution and contrast here right off across the frame. And this is, as all of these test shots are shot on the Sony A7R Mark III, and so we're resolving 42 megapixels. So you can see that there's a little bit of reduction of contrast towards the corner, but even mid-frame here, this really looks quite excellent. Also 600 millimeters, f6.3, and so we can see here looking at the pigeon that we've got really nice detail here, even though we're having to pull open the shadows a little bit underneath, but as you can see, we've still got a really crisp looking result. Now here is a handheld landscape shot. This is actually 200 millimeters and f8, and so what you can see is that there is nice acuity here. We're rendering off into the far distance across a lot of different thermal layers here. So, it's a little bit harder to have a scientific type result. So this is more of a feel result in this kind of setting. But as you can see, it is, it's nice and crisp. I mean, this is a very nicely sharp lens. So the last thing in this series that I want to look at is the OSS, and this is kind of an impractical test because you really don't want to be shooting this in real life, but this is 600 millimeters at 1/13 of a second, so very low, and you can see that it's not necessarily perfect. There's the tiniest bit of motion blur there, but I was able to get this good of a result again and again, and so overall the OSS is clearly doing the job. And again, I mean, you need to stop action with a lens like this, and so most cases you're not going to be shooting at little low shutter speeds like this, but overall I was very impressed with the performance.
So as you can see, this lens has kind of checked all of the boxes. It's got a great build and feature set. It handles very well because of the design. It has great autofocus performance, particularly when paired with one of Sony's better autofocusing bodies. And beyond that, it has very good image quality. It has good sharpness, both center and corner sharpness. I've just been really thrilled with what I've seen. I think that color rendition is good. The bokeh quality is okay. It's not exceptional, but it's in the range of what I have come to expect from lenses like this. And obviously it does have the ability to really blow out backgrounds if you're shooting at some of the longer focal distances, simply because of the compression ratio of the lens, such a long focal length. And so a lot of things to look at and to say, yeah, it's fantastic. So is it a lens that you should buy? Obviously, when compared to the 150 to 600 millimeter variants on Sony, it's definitely the way to go. Those lenses at this point you would have to adapt. If you want to get all the way to 600 millimeters, this is the way to do it because you can do it natively here, and you even have options for getting further reach as well. The reason, I would say primary reason to not choose this lens is if portability is a factor. If that is the case, you might want to consider the 100 to 400 millimeter G Master lens, and then maybe use a 1.4 times teleconverter if you want a little bit of extra reach. The form factor is much more compact, and so if storage is going to be an issue, that might be something to consider. However, if the size is not off-putting to you and you want this kind of focal range and your budget doesn't go up to the larger maximum aperture prime options, then I think that this is a lens that is well worth your consideration. It really performs fantastic. And my only hesitation in looking at purchasing one myself is that I know that this is a gorgeous lens that I would love using it when I had the right situation to use it in. However, I also know from experience that I don't reach for lenses like this all that often, and so it would probably be collecting dust, something like 350 days out of the year. And that is just, a personal consideration when it comes to the economics versus what I'm going to get out of the lens. But I would have no hesitation in putting the money down to purchase the lens if I shot this kind of photography on a regular basis. I think it is a great option, and I think Sony's done a great job with this. And at the end of the day, for the kind of performance you're getting from autofocus to build to image quality, I think that it's priced reasonably as well. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you will find linkage to my full text review. There's also linkage to an image gallery if you would like to look at some of the photos that I've taken as a part of this. Beyond that, of course, there are buying links if you'd like to purchase one for yourself, linkage to follow me on social media, or to become a patron. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.